The ivory silk gown hung like a ghost in my bridal suite, its hand-sewn pearls catching the morning light streaming through the cathedral windows of St. Augustine's chapel. In exactly 3 hours, I would walk down that aisle to marry Marcus Wellington III, heir to Wellington Industries, and the man who had swept me off my feet 2 years ago at a charity gala. "Emma, darling, you look absolutely radiant," my mother gushed, adjusting the vintage tiara that had been in the Wellington family for generations. The same tiara Marcus's grandmother had worn when she married his grandfather in this very chapel 60 years ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror, trying to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. The woman looking back at me was everything I'd dreamed of becoming. Successful marketing executive at Morrison Associates, engaged to one of the city's most eligible bachelors, about to have the wedding of the century. So why did something feel so terribly wrong? "The photographer wants to get some shots of you with the dress before the ceremony," my maid of honor, Sarah, announced, bustling into the room with her characteristic efficiency. She'd been my college roommate and closest friend for 8 years, the one person who knew all my secrets. Well, almost all of them. As the photographer positioned me for the shots, I caught sight of Marcus through the window. He was standing in the courtyard below, perfectly groomed in his custom Armani tuxedo, laughing with his groomsmen. Everything about the scene looked perfect from the outside: the handsome groom, the picturesque chapel, the army of staff ensuring every detail was flawless. But I'd learned that perfection often hid the deepest flaws. My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus probably sending me one of his sweet pre-wedding messages. Instead, I found something that made my blood freeze. "Emergency at the office. Major client crisis. Have to handle this first. Start without me." I read it 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding. Start without me? What kind of groom tells his bride to start their wedding without him? "Everything all right, honey?" Sarah asked, noticing my expression. "Marcus says there's an emergency. At work," I managed, my voice barely steady. "He wants us to start without him." The room fell silent. My mother's face went pale. The photographer lowered his camera, and Sarah's mouth dropped open in disbelief. "That's impossible," my mother stammered. "It's his wedding day. Surely whatever it is can wait a few hours." I called his number. Straight to voicemail. Called again. Same result. "Maybe there's been some miscommunication," Sarah suggested weakly, but her expression said she knew better. In college, she'd watched me date men who always put everything else before our relationship. She'd hoped Marcus was different. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot. To us! Now, back to the story. I walked to the window, my designer heels clicking against the marble floor. Down in the courtyard, Marcus was gone. His groomsmen were scattered, checking their phones with confused expressions. The best man, his brother Jonathan, was pacing frantically while talking on his cell. Another text came through, this time from Jonathan. "Marcus left for the office. Says the Brennan Industries deal fell through and only he can fix it. I don't know what to tell people." The Brennan Industries deal. The same deal Marcus had been obsessing over for months, working late nights and weekends, canceling dinner plans and postponing conversations about our future. The deal that he'd claimed was worth more than $50 million to Wellington Industries. More than our wedding, apparently. "Ladies and gentlemen," I heard the wedding coordinator's voice echoing from the chapel's sound system. "We're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain seated while we sort out a small logistical issue." A small logistical issue. That's what I'd become. A logistical issue to be managed while Marcus handled more important matters. I sank into the antique chair by the window, my elaborate train pooling around me like spilled cream. 300 guests were seated in that chapel, including Marcus's parents, his business associates, my extended family who'd flown in from across the country. The flowers alone had cost $15,000. The reception venue was prepared for a sit-down dinner for 300, with a string quartet already warming up. And the groom had gone to the office. "Emma," my mother said gently, kneeling beside my chair, "what do you want to do?" What did I want to do? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to call Marcus and demand he explain how a business deal could be more important than the woman he claimed to love. But mostly, I wanted to understand how I'd gotten here. The truth was, I'd been seeing warning signs for months. Marcus canceling our engagement party planning session for a client dinner, forgetting our anniversary because of a board meeting, taking calls during romantic dinners, always apologizing but never changing. I'd told myself it was temporary stress, that things would be different after the wedding. "Miss Collins?" The wedding coordinator appeared in the doorway, her professional smile strained. "The guests are getting restless. Shall I make an announcement about the delay?" Before I could answer, Jonathan burst into the room, his face flushed and tie askew. "Emma, I'm so sorry," he began, then stopped when he saw my expression. "You already know." "Where did he go?" I asked quietly. "Wellington Industries' downtown office. The Japanese investors flew in unexpectedly for the Brennan deal. Marcus said—" Jonathan paused, looking uncomfortable. "What did he say?" "He said the deal was worth more than a wedding that's already paid for. That you'd understand because you're a businesswoman too." The words hit me like a physical blow. Not just that he'd prioritized business over our wedding, but that he'd calculated it so coldly. The wedding was already paid for, so what was the rush? I'd still be there when he finished making his money. Sarah grabbed my hand. "Emma, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," I interrupted, standing up so quickly that my tiara shifted. I reached up and carefully removed it, placing it on the vanity table. "I have 300 people out there who deserve an explanation." My mother looked terrified. "Surely we can work something out. Maybe postpone for a few hours." "Mom," I said gently, "if he can leave me at the altar for a business deal, what do you think our marriage would look like?" The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. It would look exactly like this: me waiting while Marcus handled more important things. I walked to the full-length mirror and studied my reflection one final time. The woman staring back at me was beautifully dressed, but utterly abandoned. The irony wasn't lost on me. I looked like the perfect bride for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. "I need to address the guests," I announced, smoothing down my dress. "They deserve to know the truth." "Emma, think about this carefully," my mother pleaded. "The embarrassment, the gossip, the money. The money's already spent, Mom. And honestly, I think I've been embarrassed enough for one day." I started toward the door, then paused. From my purse, I pulled out the letter I'd written to Marcus the night before. A heartfelt note about my hopes and dreams for our marriage, meant to be delivered to him this morning. Instead, I tore it in half and dropped the pieces in the wastebasket. "Sarah," I said, turning to my maid of honor, "would you mind helping me with this train? I have a chapel full of people to address." As we walked through the corridors toward the chapel, I could hear the murmur of confused voices and restless movement. The string quartet had stopped playing. Wedding coordinators scurried past us with worried expressions. At the chapel doors, I paused. Through the glass, I could see 300 guests in their finest attire, checking their watches and whispering among themselves. Marcus's parents sat in the front row, his mother's face pale with what I assumed was mortification. Wedding coordinator approached me hesitantly. "Miss Collins, shall I announce a postponement?" "No," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "I'll speak to them myself." She looked horrified. "Are you certain? Perhaps a private announcement to immediate family first?" "They're all here, dressed, up, waiting for a wedding. They deserve to hear from the bride why there isn't going to be one." I pushed open the doors and stepped into the chapel. The collective intake of breath was audible as 300 pairs of eyes focused on me. I walked down the aisle I was supposed to have walked as a bride, but instead of approaching an altar where my groom waited, I was approaching an altar where only the minister stood, looking as confused as everyone else. My heels echoed in the sudden silence as I made my way to the front of the chapel. When I reached the altar, I turned to face the congregation. Friends, family, colleagues, business associates, all staring at me with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity to outright shock. I took a breath and began to speak. "Thank you all for being here today," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the chapel's acoustics. "I know you came expecting to witness a wedding, and I'm sorry to disappoint you." A ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. "Marcus won't be joining us today. He's at his office handling what he described as a business emergency more important than our wedding ceremony." The whispers grew louder. I could see some guests checking their phones, probably texting about the drama unfolding before their eyes. "I want you all to know that this isn't about one missed wedding," I continued, feeling strength building in my voice. "This is about a pattern of priorities that I can no longer ignore. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. And Marcus has shown me very clearly where I rank in his life." Marcus's mother stood up abruptly and walked out of the chapel, her heels clicking angrily against the stone floor. His father followed, but not before shooting me a look that could have frozen hell. "The reception venue has been paid for," I announced, "and the food has been prepared. You're all welcome to join me for what was supposed to be my wedding dinner. Consider it a celebration of new beginnings." With that, I turned and walked back down the aisle, my train flowing behind me like a river of silk and broken dreams. But as I reached the chapel doors, I realized something unexpected. I felt lighter than I had in months. For the first time in 2 years, I wasn't waiting for Marcus to decide what came next. As I exited the chapel, I nearly collided with a man in a dark suit who was rushing up the steps. He steadied me with gentle hands, and when I looked up into his concerned brown eyes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Genuine warmth from a stranger. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice deep and sincere. "Are you all right? I heard there was some kind of emergency." I studied his face, kind eyes, strong jawline, an expression of real concern rather than the curiosity I'd seen on most guests' faces. He was handsome in an understated way, completely different from Marcus's polished perfection. "Are you here for the wedding?" I asked. "I was supposed to deliver some documents to Marcus Wellington," he replied. Then his eyes widened as he took in my wedding dress. Oh my God, you're the bride." "Was," I corrected. "I was the bride. The groom had more important things to do." Something flickered across his expression. Not pity, but anger on my behalf. "I'm Daniel," he said simply. "Daniel Hayes. And if it helps at all, any man who would leave you standing at the altar is an absolute fool." I found myself smiling for the first time that day. "Thank you, Daniel Hayes. I'm Emma Collins, soon-to-be former fiancée of said fool." "Well, Emma Collins," he said, offering me his arm. "Would you like some help getting out of here? I imagine you could use some air that isn't filled with wedding guests' shocked whispers." I looked at his offered arm, then back at the chapel where the drama was still unfolding. Through the doors, I could see guests beginning to file out, some heading to their cars, others clearly planning to attend my impromptu reception celebration. "Actually," I said, surprising myself, "I think I could use exactly that." As Daniel helped me navigate the chapel steps in my elaborate gown, I realized that sometimes the worst day of your life can also be the first day of something much better. I just didn't know yet how much better it was about to become. Daniel's car was a modest black sedan, completely different from Marcus's flashy Mercedes convertible. As he helped me gather my voluminous train into the passenger seat, I caught a glimpse of the documents scattered on his dashboard. Legal papers with Wellington Industries letterhead. You're a lawyer? I asked as he started the engine. Corporate. Attorney, he confirmed, pulling away from the chapel. Though today I'm more of a messenger service, apparently. These documents were supposed to be in Marcus's hands an hour ago. I laughed bitterly. Well, Marcus is busy saving the world one business deal at a time. What kind of documents are so urgent they couldn't wait until after his honeymoon? Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Actually, that's what's strange. These are termination papers for the Brennan Industries deal. The contract was voided yesterday when Brennan Industries filed for bankruptcy protection. The words hit me like ice water. What did you just say? The deal your fiancé supposedly rushed off to save? It doesn't exist anymore. Brennan Industries went under yesterday afternoon. The Japanese investors he mentioned? They pulled out 3 days ago when they got wind of Brennan's financial troubles. I stared at him, my mind racing. That's impossible. Marcus said it was a $50 million emergency. The only emergency, Daniel said carefully, is that Marcus apparently didn't want anyone to know the deal fell through. According to my sources, Wellington Industries was counting on this contract to cover some significant debts. Without it, he trailed off, glancing at me with concern. Without it? What? Without it, Wellington Industries is in serious financial trouble. The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Marcus's increased stress over the past few months, his obsession with this particular deal, his father's recent comments about tightening belts and weathering temporary storms, the way Marcus had insisted on a prenup that protected his assets while leaving mine exposed. Pull over, I said suddenly. Are you okay? Do you need— Pull over, please. Daniel immediately guided the car to the curb outside a small park. I fumbled with the door handle, needing air, needing space to think. He came around to help me out, and together we managed to extract me and my dress from the car without too much damage to the silk. I sank onto a park bench, not caring about the designer gown. Daniel sat beside me, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough that I could feel his steadying presence. He lied to me, I said finally. He didn't leave me for a business emergency. He left me because he didn't want to face the consequences of his failure. It's worse than that, Daniel said gently. Emma, I need to tell you something else. I wasn't just delivering termination papers today. I looked at him, dreading what was coming next. I was also supposed to deliver a cease and desist order. Wellington Industries has been using fraudulent financial statements to secure additional funding. The investigation started 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. Right around the time Marcus had suddenly become even more distant, more stressed, more quick to anger over small things. You're telling me that not only did Marcus abandon me at the altar for a deal that doesn't exist, but he's also been committing fraud. I'm telling you that you're probably very lucky he didn't show up today, Daniel said quietly, because if he had gone through with the wedding, you could have been legally liable for his debts. And according to what I've seen, those debts are substantial. I felt like I was seeing my life from an entirely different angle, like one of those optical illusions that suddenly shifts from a vase to two faces. Everything I'd thought I knew about Marcus, about our relationship, about our future together, was wrong. How do you know all this? I asked. Daniel was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his business card. Daniel Hayes, Senior Partner, Hayes & Associates. We specialize in corporate fraud investigation. I took the card, studying it. You've been investigating Marcus? Wellington Industries hired us 6 months ago to conduct an internal audit. What? We found led to a criminal investigation. I'm sorry, Emma. I wish I could tell you this was all a misunderstanding. 6 months. Marcus had known for 6 months that his company was in trouble, that he was being investigated, that our entire future was built on lies, and he'd let me plan a wedding, send invitations, book venues, all while knowing it might end in financial and legal disaster. The prenup, I said suddenly. He insisted on a prenup that protected his assets but not mine. Daniel nodded grimly. Standard practice for someone expecting legal troubles. He was protecting what he could while making sure any debts or judgments would fall on the other spouse. The full scope of Marcus's betrayal was becoming clear. It wasn't just that he'd abandoned me at the altar. He'd been planning to use me as a financial shield, someone to absorb the consequences of his criminal activity while he preserved whatever wealth he could hide. "I need to see those documents," I said. Daniel hesitated. "Emma, you're not my client. I can't ethically—" "Marcus made me a party to this the moment he put my name on that marriage license application," I interrupted. "And, according to what you just told me, I was about to become legally responsible for his debts. I think I have a right to know what I almost stepped into." He considered this, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "This is a copy of our preliminary findings. The criminal investigation is ongoing, but these are the basic facts." I opened the folder and began reading. With each page, my anger grew. Marcus hadn't just been hiding the failure of the Brennan deal. He'd been systematically inflating contract values, hiding losses, and using company funds for personal expenses. The wedding itself had been paid for with embezzled money. "The FBI is involved," Daniel said as I read. "They've been building a case for weeks. I suspect that's the real reason Marcus didn't show up today. His lawyers probably advised him that getting married right now would complicate things legally. So he saved himself and left me to face 300 guests alone," I said, fury building in my voice. "From what I can see here, yes." I closed the folder and sat back, my mind working furiously. Marcus had calculated that abandoning me would be less damaging than facing the legal consequences of marrying me. He'd chosen his own protection over my dignity, my emotions, my future. "Daniel," I said slowly, "how much do you know about the investigation timeline? The FBI is planning arrests within the next few days. Why?" An idea was forming, dangerous and satisfying. Because Marcus doesn't know that I know any of this. He thinks he abandoned me for a business deal. He has no idea that I'm aware of the fraud, the bankruptcy, the investigation. "Emma, what are you thinking?" I stood up, smoothing my wedding dress with new determination. "I'm thinking that Marcus Wellington III is about to learn that abandoning someone at the altar has consequences he never anticipated." Daniel stood too, looking concerned. "You can't interfere with a federal investigation." "I'm not planning to interfere. I'm planning to make sure justice is served in the most appropriate way possible." I turned to face him, and something in my expression must have alarmed him because he stepped back slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means that Marcus spent 2 years lying to me, manipulating me, and setting me up to take the fall for his crimes. He thinks he outsmarted everyone by leaving me at the altar, but what he doesn't realize is that he just gave me the perfect opportunity for revenge." My phone buzzed with a text message. "Marcus, finally. Sorry about today. Emergency couldn't be helped. We'll reschedule when things calm down. You understand, right?" I showed the message to Daniel, whose eyebrows shot up. "He wants to reschedule?" "Oh, he absolutely does not want to reschedule," I said, fury making my voice steady and cold. "He wants to keep me on the hook as long as possible in case he needs a wife for legal protection. String me along, make me think this was just bad timing instead of deliberate abandonment." I started walking back toward the car, my train trailing behind me like a battle flag. "Where are we going?" Daniel asked, hurrying to keep up. "To the reception venue. I told the guests they could join me for dinner, and I intend to honor that invitation. But first, I need to make some phone calls." As Daniel helped me back into the car, I was already mentally composing my strategy. Marcus thought he'd protected himself by abandoning me. What he didn't realize was that he'd just given me all the motivation and freedom I needed to ensure his downfall was as public and devastating as possible. "Emma," Daniel said as we pulled back into traffic, "I feel like I should warn you that Revenge schemes often backfire, especially when federal investigations are involved. I looked at him, this kind stranger who'd appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the information I needed. Daniel, do you have plans for the rest of the day? Just delivering these documents to a man who apparently isn't where he's supposed to be? He said carefully. How would you feel about attending a wedding reception where the bride was abandoned at the altar by a man who's about to be arrested for federal crimes? He was quiet for a long moment. That sounds like the most interesting Saturday I've had in years. Good, I said, pulling out my phone to start making calls. Because I have a feeling you're about to witness something spectacular. The first call was to Sarah. I need you to gather all of Marcus's things from the bridal suite and have them delivered to Wellington Industries. Every gift, every personal item, everything. And Sarah? Make sure there are photographers around when the delivery happens. The second call was to my lawyer. I need you to research the legal implications of calling off a wedding when one party is under federal investigation for fraud. The third call was to the event coordinator at the reception venue. This is Emma Collins. Yes, the abandoned bride. I need you to make some changes to today's program. As I made each call, I could feel Daniel watching me with a mixture of admiration and concern. By the time we reached the reception venue, I had transformed from abandoned bride to strategic mastermind. Marcus Wellington III had made the biggest mistake of his life when he left me at that altar. He'd given me both the motive and the opportunity to ensure his crimes didn't go unnoticed, and I was just getting started. The reception venue looked exactly as it had been planned. Elegant, expensive, and perfect for a celebration. The only difference was that instead of celebrating a marriage, we were about to celebrate justice. Ready? Daniel asked as we pulled up to the entrance. I checked my reflection in the side mirror, adjusting my dress and straightening my shoulders. The woman looking back at me was no longer the abandoned bride. She was someone with purpose, with power, and with a plan. More than ready, I replied. Let's go give the guests a reception they'll never forget. The ballroom at the riverside manor was a testament to months of meticulous planning. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk. Centerpieces of white roses and peonies perfumed the air, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Everything was exactly as I'd envisioned for my perfect wedding reception, except for the complete absence of a groom. Miss Collins, the venue manager approached nervously as Daniel and I entered. We weren't sure, given the circumstances. Should we proceed with dinner service? Absolutely, I replied, surveying the room where approximately 200 guests had decided to stay despite the drama. But first, I need to make an announcement. Daniel touched my arm gently. Are you sure about this? I looked around the room at the faces staring at us, some curious, some pitying, some clearly enjoying the spectacle. These were people from every part of my life, colleagues from Morrison Associates, family friends, my college sorority sisters, even some of Marcus's business associates who'd apparently decided the free dinner was worth the awkwardness. Absolutely sure, I said, then walked to the small stage where the band was set up. The string quartet stopped playing as I approached the microphone. Conversations died away as all eyes focused on me, still in my elaborate wedding gown, but now accompanied by a handsome stranger who clearly wasn't the groom everyone expected to see. Good evening, everyone, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Thank you for staying. I know this isn't the reception any of us planned to attend. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I want to address what happened today because I believe you all deserve the truth. Marcus didn't abandon me at the altar for a business emergency. He abandoned me because he's been lying to me, to all of us, for months. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Guests leaned forward, phones were discreetly pulled out, and I could see several people starting to record. 3 hours ago, I learned that the emergency Marcus claimed required his immediate attention doesn't exist. The business deal he supposedly rushed off to save was terminated yesterday when the other company filed for bankruptcy. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. At a table near the front, I spotted Marcus's business partner, James Crawford, his face pale as he undoubtedly realized where this was heading. But that's not all, I continued, feeling strength building in my voice. I've also learned that Wellington Industries is currently under federal investigation for fraud. The FBI has been building a case for weeks. The murmurs turned to shocked exclamations. James Crawford stood up abruptly and headed for the exit, but I wasn't finished. The man I was supposed to marry today has been systematically embezzling funds, falsifying financial records, and using company money for personal expenses, including, I paused for effect, paying for this wedding. The room erupted. Guests were talking excitedly among themselves. Several people were making phone calls, and I could see the business associates in attendance having urgent conversations with their lawyers on speed dial. So when Marcus asks any of you why I didn't understand his business emergency, you can tell him that I understood perfectly. I understood that he's a criminal who was willing to let me become legally liable for his crimes. I understood that he calculated abandoning me would be less damaging than facing the consequences of his actions. And I understood that any man who would do that is not someone I would ever want to marry. The applause started slowly, then built to a standing ovation. Through the crowd, I could see Sarah wiping away tears, my mother looking both proud and horrified, and Daniel watching me with an expression of pure admiration. "Now," I said as the applause died down, "let's eat. This dinner cost $50,000 of embezzled money, so we might as well enjoy it before the FBI seizes the rest of Marcus's assets." As I stepped down from the stage, the room exploded into conversation. Guests were pulling out their phones, journalists who'd been covering the society wedding were frantically taking notes, and several people were already posting updates to social media. Daniel met me at the bottom of the stage. "Steps. That was incredible," he said quietly. "Also probably the most expensive way to destroy someone's reputation in history." "Worth every penny," I replied, especially since it wasn't my money. The event coordinator appeared beside us looking flustered. "Miss Collins, we're receiving calls from reporters. How should we handle—" "Let them in," I said. "This is going to be news regardless. Might as well control the narrative." Over the next hour, the reception transformed into something unprecedented. What had been planned as an elegant dinner became an impromptu press conference, with me as the star witness to corporate fraud and personal betrayal. Reporters arrived, photographers snapped pictures of the abandoned bride speaking truth to power, and social media exploded with hashtags like "left at the altar" and "corporate fraud." "Emma," Daniel said during a brief lull between interviews, "you realize what you've done, right? By tomorrow morning, this story will be national news." "Good," I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Marcus wanted to avoid embarrassment? Let's see how he handles being the poster child for corporate greed and personal cowardice. My phone had been buzzing constantly throughout the evening. Texts from friends expressing support, calls from reporters requesting interviews, and increasingly frantic messages from Marcus. "Emma, what the hell are you doing? I'm seeing news reports about our wedding. Call me immediately." Then, "This is insane. You're destroying my reputation over a misunderstanding. Stop talking to reporters now." And finally, "You're going to regret this. I have lawyers." I showed the messages to Daniel, who shook his head in amazement. Even now, he thinks this is about wounded pride instead of criminal activity. "Marcus has always been good at self-deception," I said, right up until reality forces him to face facts. That reality was about to arrive sooner than expected. My lawyer called just as the main course was being served. "Emma, I need to give you a heads up. The FBI moved up their timeline because of the media attention. They're executing arrest warrants tonight. I felt a surge of satisfaction. How long do we have? They're at Wellington Industries now. Should be at his apartment within the hour. I hung up and turned to find Daniel watching me with concern. The FBI is arresting him tonight, I said simply. How do you feel about that? I considered the question seriously. How did I feel about watching the man I'd planned to marry get arrested for federal crimes on what should have been our wedding night? Relieved, I said finally. Relieved that I found out who he really was before it was too late. The evening continued to unfold in surreal fashion. Guests who'd come expecting a traditional wedding reception found themselves witnessing the real-time destruction of a corporate empire. Business associates quietly slipped away to distance themselves from the scandal. Society friends took pictures, with me treating the abandoned bride as a folk hero. My college friends formed a protective circle, ensuring I had support as I navigated the chaos I'd created. Ma'am? A young woman approached our table. I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News. Could I get a brief interview about your decision to expose your ex-fiancé's crimes? Of course, I said, standing and smoothing my dress. The interview was broadcast live, and within minutes, clips were circulating online. The image of me in my wedding gown, calmly explaining how I'd discovered my fiancé's fraud, became an instant sensation. This is going viral, Sarah reported, showing me her phone. You're trending on 3 social media platforms. As the evening wore on, I began to realize the full scope of what I'd accomplished. By refusing to quietly accept Marcus's abandonment, by demanding the truth and sharing it publicly, I'd not only exposed his crimes, but also prevented him from finding new victims. Other investors, other women, other business partners who might have fallen for his lies were now warned. Emma, Daniel said as we sat together during a quiet moment, can I ask you something personal? After everything that's happened today, I think we're past worrying about personal boundaries. He smiled. How are you holding up? Really? This has been an incredible day, but it's also been traumatic. I looked around the ballroom, taking in the scene. Guests were laughing and talking, reporters were filing stories, waiters were serving wedding cake to a bride who'd never said I do. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. My chaos. You know what's strange? I said. I feel better than I have in months. For the past year, I've been trying to fit myself into Marcus's vision of what a successful man's wife should be. Always supportive, never challenging, putting his career first. Today, for the first time in years, I feel like myself again. And who is that? Daniel asked softly. Someone who doesn't accept being abandoned. Someone who fights back when she's betrayed. Someone who refuses to be anyone's victim. A notification chimed on my phone. A news alert. Wellington Industries CEO arrested on federal fraud charges. I showed the screen to Daniel, who whistled low. It's official. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced, standing and raising my champagne glass. I'd like to propose a toast. The room quieted as everyone turned to face me. To truth? I said, my voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. To justice, and to the courage to speak up when someone tries to silence us. The cheer that rose from the crowd was deafening. But as I looked out over the faces of friends, family, and strangers who'd witnessed my transformation from victim to victor, I realized something important. This wasn't just about revenge against Marcus. It was about reclaiming my own power, my own voice, my own life. And standing beside me through it all was Daniel, a man who'd appeared at exactly the right moment with exactly the information I needed, who'd supported my decisions without trying to control them, who looked at me like I was something remarkable rather than something to be managed. So, Daniel said as the crowd returned to their conversations and the evening began winding down, what happens now? I looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time since we'd met outside the chapel. His kind eyes, his genuine smile, the way he'd stayed by my side through everything without once trying to talk me out of my choices or protect me from the consequences. Now, I said, I guess we find out what comes after revenge. The way he looked at me when I said that made me think that whatever came next might be even better than the satisfaction of bringing down Marcus Wellington III. But first, I had a few more interviews to give, a few more truth bombs to drop, and a wedding dress to finally take off. After all, tomorrow was the first day of my new life, and I wanted to start it as myself, not as anyone's abandoned bride, but as Emma Collins, the woman who refused to be silenced. I woke up on Sunday morning in my own apartment for the first time in 3 months, having moved back from the penthouse I'd been sharing with Marcus. Sunlight streamed through windows that weren't floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city's financial district. Instead, they faced a small garden where Mrs. Peterson from next door was tending her roses, blissfully unaware that her neighbor had become overnight tabloid sensation. My phone showed 847 missed calls and over 2,000 text messages. The notifications had been coming in waves since I'd finally turned it back on at 6 a.m. Interview requests from major networks, messages of support from college friends I hadn't spoken to in years, and several very interesting calls from attorneys representing other Wellington Industries victims. The doorbell rang as I was scrolling through a particularly entertaining series of tweets featuring my wedding dress speech. Through the peephole, I saw Daniel holding 2 coffee cups and what appeared to be every Sunday newspaper in the city. "Thought you might want to see the coverage," he said when I opened the door, "and possibly need caffeine to process it." I accepted, the coffee gratefully inhaling the rich aroma. "Please tell me it's not as bad as I think it's going to be." "Define bad," Daniel said, spreading the newspapers across my kitchen counter. "If you mean damaging to your reputation, then no. If you mean likely to completely destroy Marcus's life and business empire, then definitely yes." The headlines were spectacular. "Bride's revenge, wedding becomes FBI sting operation." Left at the altar, she left him in handcuffs. The wedding. Speech that brought down a corporate empire. My favorite was from the business section. "How one woman's honesty exposed millions in fraud." "They're calling you the truth-telling bride," Daniel said, pointing to an editorial piece. "Several women's rights organizations want to give you awards for speaking out against financial abuse." I stared at a photo of myself from last night, standing at the microphone in my wedding gown, looking fierce and determined rather than broken. I hardly recognize myself. "You look like exactly who you are," Daniel said quietly. "Someone who refuses to be anyone's victim." My phone rang, displaying my boss's number. I glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. "Emma." Richard Morrison's voice was warm with what sounded like pride. "I've been watching the news all morning. How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I said honestly. "Though I'm not sure what tomorrow's going to look like." "Well, I can tell you what Monday's going to look like. We've been fielding calls since 7 a.m. from potential clients who want Morrison Associates to handle their marketing specifically because of what you did yesterday. Apparently, standing up to corporate fraud is excellent advertising for our integrity." I nearly dropped the phone. "Are you saying I'm not fired for creating a media circus?" Richard laughed. "Emma, you've just demonstrated exactly the kind of backbone we want representing our firm. Take the week off to handle the media requests, then come back ready to take on some very high-profile accounts." After I hung up, Daniel was grinning at me. "Good news?" "My boss wants to give me a promotion," I said, still processing. "Apparently, destroying my ex-fiancé's life has been excellent for my career prospects." "There's more," Daniel said, pointing to his own phone. "The FBI wants to interview you officially about your knowledge of Marcus's activities. Not as a suspect," he added quickly, seeing my expression, "but as a witness. Your testimony could be crucial for their case." The reality of what I'd set in motion was beginning to sink in. This wasn't just about embarrassing Marcus or getting revenge for being abandoned. I was now a key witness in a federal fraud case that could send him to prison for decades. "Daniel, I said slowly. What exactly did I get myself into? You got yourself into being the person who ended a criminal enterprise that was defrauding investors out of millions of dollars, he replied seriously. The FBI estimates that Wellington Industries was operating a Ponzi scheme that would have collapsed eventually, taking dozens of pension funds and individual investors with it. By exposing Marcus when you did, you probably saved hundreds of people from losing their life savings. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming. I just wanted him to face consequences for abandoning me. And in doing that, you protected a lot of other people from becoming his victims, Daniel said, moving closer. Emma, what you did took incredible courage. Most people would have quietly canceled the wedding and tried to move on. You chose to fight back. I looked at this man who'd become my unlikely ally in less than 24 hours. Why are you here, Daniel? I mean, really? You delivered your documents. The case is moving forward. Your job is done. Why are you in my kitchen on Sunday morning? Bringing me coffee and newspapers? He set down his cup and turned to face me fully. Because yesterday, I watched you transform from an abandoned bride into the strongest woman I've ever met. Because when you stood up on that stage and told the truth, you became someone I couldn't stop thinking about. And because... He paused, his expression vulnerable. I've been investigating corporate criminals for 15 years, and I've never met anyone with the combination of intelligence, courage, and integrity that you showed last night. My heart was beating faster, but I had to ask the obvious question. Daniel, we met yesterday. You don't really know me. I know that when faced with the choice between protecting yourself and protecting others, you chose others. I know that, when given the opportunity to quietly disappear and avoid embarrassment, you chose to speak the truth publicly. I know that when offered an easy exit, you chose the hard path because it was the right path. He stepped closer, his voice soft but serious. I also know that I've spent most of my adult life believing that people like that don't really exist. You proved me wrong. Before I could respond, my phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. Emma Collins? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. This is Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI. We need to schedule a formal interview regarding your knowledge of Marcus Wellington's activities. Of course, I said, motioning for Daniel to stay close. When? As soon as possible. Mr. Wellington's attorneys are claiming his actions were the result of business pressure and that he never intended to defraud anyone. Your testimony about his calculated abandonment of the wedding could establish a pattern of deliberate deception rather than poor judgment. After scheduling the interview for Monday morning, I hung up and looked at Daniel. They want me to testify that Marcus is a calculating criminal rather than someone who made bad business decisions under pressure. Are you willing to do that? I thought about Marcus's text messages last night, his threats about lawyers, his complete lack of acknowledgement that he'd done anything wrong. Absolutely. Good, Daniel said, because I have something else to tell you. The investigation has expanded. They found evidence that Marcus was planning to flee the country after your honeymoon. He'd already transferred significant funds to, offshore accounts and had purchased tickets to a non-extradition country. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. He was going to take me on our honeymoon and then disappear? It looks that way. The FBI thinks he was planning to abandon you somewhere overseas and vanish with whatever money he could steal. Your prenup would have left you legally responsible for his debts while he started a new life somewhere else. I sat down heavily on my couch, the full scope of Marcus's betrayal finally clear. It wasn't just that he'd chosen business over our wedding. He'd been planning to use me as a cover for his escape, leaving me trapped in his web of fraud while he disappeared with stolen millions. That son of a bitch, I said quietly, then louder. That calculating, manipulative son of a bitch. Daniel sat beside me, his presence steady and comforting. Emma, you didn't just dodge a bullet yesterday. You dodged a missile. How is this possible? I asked. How did I spend 2 years with someone and never see who he really was? Because he's a skilled manipulator who spent those 2 years showing you exactly what he wanted you to see, Daniel said. Sociopaths are often charming, successful, and very good at hiding their true nature. I leaned back against the couch cushions, processing everything. So the man I was going to marry was planning to commit fraud, abandon me in a foreign country, and leave me to face criminal charges while he lived off stolen money in paradise. That appears to be the plan, yes. And the only reason I found out was because he panicked and left me at the altar? His arrogance saved you, Daniel confirmed. He thought he was so smart that he could manage every variable, but he couldn't control your reaction to being abandoned. I started laughing. Surprising myself? He literally saved me from himself by being too cowardly to face me. Daniel smiled. There's a certain poetic justice to that. My phone buzzed with another text, this one from Sarah. Girl, you're famous. The video of your speech has 3 million views on YouTube. Also, Marcus's mugshot is trending. You destroyed him. Are you okay? I showed the message to Daniel, who checked his own phone. She's right about the views. You've officially gone viral. As the woman who brought down her own fiancé with a wedding speech, I said, shaking my head. This is not how I imagined. My life going? Is that a bad thing? I considered the question seriously. 24 hours ago, I'd been preparing to marry a man who was planning to destroy my life. Now I was free, safe, and apparently a folk hero for refusing to be silenced. No, I said finally. I think it might be the best thing that ever happened to me. Daniel's expression grew serious. Emma, I need to tell you something. The FBI investigation is going to be intense. Marcus's lawyers will try to paint you as a vindictive ex-fiancé who's lying to get revenge. The media attention is going to be overwhelming. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the alternative, being married to Marcus, trapped in his lies, possibly facing criminal charges myself while he disappeared with stolen money. Bring it on, I said. I spent 2 years letting Marcus control the narrative of our relationship. I'm not going to let his lawyers control the narrative of his crimes. Daniel's admiration was clear in his expression. You're remarkable, you know that? I'm learning, I said, meeting his gaze. Daniel, can I ask you something? Anything. When this is all over, when the investigation is finished and the media moves on to the next story, what happens then? He was quiet for a moment, then reached over and took my hand. Then we find out if what I'm feeling right now is real, or if it's just adrenaline and extraordinary circumstances. And what are you feeling right now? Like I've been waiting my whole life to meet someone exactly like you, he said simply. Like yesterday was the worst and best day of your life. And I'm incredibly lucky I got to be part of both. I squeezed his hand, feeling something settle into place in my chest. Daniel Hayes, corporate fraud investigator and Sunday morning coffee deliverer. Emma Collins, truth-telling bride and corporate crime fighter. We sat together on my couch, surrounded by newspapers chronicling the destruction of my former life and the beginning of something entirely new. Outside, Mrs. Peterson continued tending her roses. The world kept spinning, and somewhere across the city, Marcus Wellington III was probably learning that abandoning the wrong woman at the altar could cost everything. But all of that felt distant and manageable, because for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't facing the future alone. I was facing it with someone who'd seen me at my most vulnerable and my most powerful, and who somehow managed to make both feel like exactly who I was meant to be. Monday morning arrived with a media circus camped outside my apartment building. Through my bedroom window, I could see news vans, reporters with cameras, and what appeared to be a small crowd of supporters holding signs reading, "Truth-telling bride" and "Justice for Emma." The sight was both thrilling and terrifying. How many are there? Daniel asked from the kitchen, where he was making breakfast. He'd stayed the night on my couch, claiming he wanted to make sure I was safe from overzealous reporters, but I suspected it had more to do with neither of us wanting to end whatever was developing between us. At least 6 news crews, I called, back, and what looks like a dozen protesters. Wait, are those protesters supporting me or Marcus? Daniel joined me at the window, coffee in hand. Definitely supporting you. That sign says, "Corporate criminals belong in prison," and that woman is wearing a t-shirt with your face on it. I stared in disbelief. Someone made t-shirts? Welcome to viral fame, Daniel said dryly. Your lawyer called while you were in the shower. She wants to meet us at the FBI building early to prep for your interview. Apparently, Marcus's legal team has been busy overnight. An hour later, we were sitting in a sterile conference room at the federal building with my attorney, Patricia Chen. No relation to Agent Chen, despite the coincidence, reviewing the latest developments in the case. They're claiming you orchestrated the entire situation, Patricia said, sliding a thick document across the table. Marcus's lawyers are arguing that you knew about the investigation beforehand and timed your revelation to cause maximum damage to their client. I scanned the legal brief, my anger rising with each paragraph. They're saying I plan to be abandoned at my own wedding? They're saying you and Daniel conspired to create a media spectacle that prejudiced potential jurors against Marcus before he could receive a fair trial, Patricia explained. They want your testimony excluded and Daniel removed from the investigation for professional misconduct. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. I was delivering documents in my professional capacity. I had no idea who Emma was when I met her. Can they actually do this? I asked, feeling the first real fear I'd experienced since Saturday. Can they make it seem like I'm the villain here? They can try, Patricia said. But they have several problems. First, Daniel's delivery of those documents is well documented and was scheduled weeks before your wedding. Second, the FBI has been building their case independently for months. And third, the evidence against Marcus is overwhelming regardless of your testimony. Agent Chen entered the room, followed by a stern-looking man in his 50s who introduced himself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Ross. Miss Collins, Ross began, I want to be direct about what we're facing. Marcus Wellington's defense team has hired some of the best criminal attorneys in the country. They're going to attack your credibility, your motives, and your relationship with Mr. Hayes here. What exactly are they claiming? I asked. That you're a scorned woman seeking revenge through false allegations. That you and Daniel conspired to frame an innocent man. That your public statements were calculated to destroy evidence and intimidate witnesses. Ross paused. They're also claiming that your relationship with Daniel proves you were never really committed to Marcus and planned this entire scenario. I felt my face flush with anger. So now, having feelings for someone else after being abandoned at the altar is evidence of conspiracy? In their narrative, yes, Agent Chen said. They're going to paint you as manipulative and Daniel as corrupt. They need to discredit both of you to have any chance of creating reasonable doubt. Daniel leaned forward. What evidence do they actually have for any of this? None, Ross replied. But they don't need evidence to create doubt. They just need to convince a jury that the government's star witness might have ulterior motives. So what do? I asked. We tell the truth, Patricia said firmly. Every detail, every conversation, every emotion. The more honest and complete your testimony, the harder it becomes for them to poke holes in it. Over the next 3 hours, I recounted every aspect of my relationship with Marcus in excruciating detail. His increasing distance over the past months, his obsession with the Brennan deal, his insistence on the prenup, the morning of the wedding and his abandonment text, my decision to address the guests, meeting Daniel and learning the truth about Marcus's crimes. Let's talk about Saturday night, Ross said. After you gave your speech at the reception, did you and Mr. Hayes discuss strategy for damaging Marcus's reputation further? No, I said firmly. We talked about my feelings of betrayal and relief. Daniel warned me that revenge schemes often backfire. He never encouraged me to make any public statements. What about your decision to continue giving interviews to reporters? That was entirely my choice. I felt that Marcus had controlled the narrative of our relationship for 2 years by hiding his true character. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative of his crimes. Ross nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of honest answer that makes you credible. Now, they're going to ask about your feelings for Daniel. How do you want to handle that? I glanced at Daniel, who was watching me with an expression of quiet support. With the truth. That I've developed feelings for someone who showed me kindness and honesty when I needed it most. That after 2 years with a man who lied to me constantly, I appreciate being with someone who tells me the truth, even when it's difficult. They'll argue that proves you were never really in love with Marcus, Agent Chen warned. Maybe they're right, I said. Maybe I was in love with the version of Marcus that he wanted me to see, not with who he really was. But that doesn't make his crimes any less real. After the prep session, Daniel and I walked to a small cafe several blocks, away to escape the media attention. The afternoon sun was warm, and for a few minutes we could almost pretend we were just 2 people getting to know each other instead of key figures in a federal fraud case. How are you holding up? Daniel asked as we found a quiet corner table. Better than I expected, I said honestly. It's strange, but having them attack my credibility feels like vindication. If they have to resort to character assassination, it means they can't defend Marcus's actual crimes. You're handling this incredibly well, Daniel said. Most people would be falling apart by now. Most people probably wouldn't have turned their wedding reception into a press conference, I pointed out. No, they wouldn't have had the courage. I studied his face across the small table. Daniel, can I ask you something personal? After everything we've been through, I think we're past worrying about personal boundaries. Have you ever been married? Engaged? Serious relationships? He was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I was engaged once, about 5 years ago, to another attorney. She left me for a client, a very wealthy client who was under investigation for tax evasion. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something important about people who are attracted to wealth and status versus people who are attracted to character. He looked up at me. It also taught me to recognize the difference. And what category do I fall into? You're in a category all your own, he said. You had wealth and status with Marcus, and you gave it up to do the right thing. That's not something you see every day. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail, but Daniel's expression grew serious as he checked his own phone. What is it? I asked. Text from my partner at the firm. Marcus made bail this morning. A chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? It means he's out of jail while awaiting trial. His family posted a $5 million bond. Daniel's expression was grim. Emma, you need to be careful. Desperate people do desperate things. As if summoned by his words, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Marcus's number. Don't answer it, Daniel said immediately. I want to know what he has to say. Anything he says to you could be used to support his lawyer's claims about your motives. Let it go to voicemail. But even as the call ended, my phone chimed with a text message from Marcus. We need to talk. This has gone far enough. I can explain everything if you'll just listen. Meet me at our place, the coffee shop where we had our first date. 1 hour. Come alone. I showed the message to Daniel, whose expression darkened immediately. Absolutely not. He's trying to manipulate me into a private meeting where he can either threaten me or try to convince me to change my testimony, I said, thinking through the implications. Exactly. Which is why you're not going. Actually, I said slowly, maybe I should. Daniel stared at me. Emma, no. This is exactly the kind of thing that could backfire spectacularly. What if I record the conversation? What if Marcus says something incriminating? His lawyers are claiming he's innocent, that this is all a misunderstanding. But if he tries to threaten me or offers to make some kind of deal, that would prove their narrative is false. It's too dangerous, Daniel insisted. If something goes wrong, then I'll have backup, I interrupted. Daniel, think about it. Marcus is desperate. He's facing decades in prison. His reputation is destroyed. His business empire is crumbling. People in that situation make mistakes. My phone rang again. This time it was Patricia. Emma, I just heard Marcus made bail. Has he tried to contact you? He wants to meet, I said. And I think I should go. Absolutely not. Any contact with Marcus right now could be used to undermine your credibility. What if the FBI monitored the meeting? What if we could get him to say something that proves his lawyer's defense is fabricated? There was a long pause. That's actually not a terrible idea. Let me make some calls. An hour later, I was sitting in Patricia's office with Agent Chen, Ross, and Daniel, planning what might be the most important conversation of my life. We can have surveillance teams in place, Agent Chen explained. Audio and video recording, agents positioned around the location, immediate backup if anything goes wrong. What exactly are you hoping he'll say? Ross asked. Something that contradicts his lawyer's claims of innocence, I replied. Or something that proves he's trying to obstruct justice by influencing my testimony. It's risky, Patricia warned. If Marcus realizes he's being recorded, or if he says nothing incriminating, it could backfire. His lawyers could claim you're harassing their client. But if it works, I said, it could end this whole thing. Daniel had been quiet throughout the planning session, but now he spoke up. I don't like it. Too many variables, too many ways for it to go wrong. Daniel, I said gently, I appreciate your concern, but this is my decision. Marcus spent 2 years controlling my choices. I'm not going to let fear control them now. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. If you're doing this, I want to be as close as possible. You'll be in the surveillance van, Agent Chen assured him. Close enough to intervene if necessary. As we finalized the details, I felt a familiar mixture of fear and determination. Marcus Wellington III had manipulated me for 2 years, planned to destroy my life, and was now trying to escape consequences through more lies and manipulation. But this time, I was ready for him. This time, I held all the cards. And this time, he was going to discover that abandoning Emma Collins at the altar had been the biggest mistake of his criminal career. The tiny recording device felt like a lead weight against my skin, hidden beneath my blouse by FBI technicians who'd assured me it was undetectable. As I walked toward Cafe Luna, the cozy corner establishment where Marcus and I had shared our first coffee 3 years ago, I could feel the weight of everything riding on. The next hour. Testing, I whispered, adjusting my earpiece as I paused at the crosswalk. We hear you perfectly. Agent Chen's voice came through clearly. Remember, we need him to initiate any discussion of the crimes or any attempts to influence your testimony. Don't lead him toward incriminating statements. Through my peripheral vision, I could see the surveillance van parked across the street, knowing Daniel was inside watching every move. 2 FBI agents were positioned at nearby tables pretending to read newspapers, and another was working behind the counter as a substitute barista. If anything went wrong, help was seconds away. But as I pushed open the familiar door of Cafe Luna, hearing the cheerful chime that had once signaled the beginning of our love story, I felt completely alone. Marcus was already there, seated at our old table in the back corner. He looked different than he had just 4 days ago, haggard, older, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his expensive suit wrinkled. The confident, polished man I'd planned to marry had been replaced by someone who looked desperate and cornered. Emma. He stood as I approached, attempting his old charming smile. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, I said, sitting across from him and noting how his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. Say what you need to say, Marcus. You look beautiful, he began, then caught himself as I raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry. That's not. I need to explain what really happened Saturday. You abandoned me at our wedding for a business deal that didn't exist, I said flatly. What's to explain? Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. Emma, you don't understand. Yes, the Brennan deal fell through, but that wasn't why I left. I had just found out about the FBI investigation that morning. My lawyers told me that getting married while under federal scrutiny could implicate you in things you had nothing to do with. I stared at him, impressed despite myself by the smoothness of his lie. So you abandoned me at the altar to protect me? Yes. Exactly. His relief was palpable. I was trying to keep you safe from all this legal mess. I never meant to hurt you, Emma. I love you. Everything I did was to protect the woman I want to spend my life with. By committing fraud? By embezzling money? By planning to flee the country? Marcus's face went pale. Who told you about... He caught himself, but not quickly enough. About your escape plan? Your offshore accounts? The tickets to countries without extradition treaties? I kept my voice level, watching as his expression shifted from desperate charm to calculation. Emma, someone has been filling your head with lies. The FBI is trying to make me look like some kind of master criminal when all I did was make some aggressive business decisions during a difficult economic period. Aggressive business decisions like stealing $50 million from investor accounts? I borrowed against future earnings to keep the company afloat, Marcus said, his voice taking on the smooth, confident tone I remembered from our relationship. It's called leveraging, Emma. Every successful businessman does it. And the false financial statements? The fake contracts? The shell companies? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. When he spoke again, his voice was colder, more calculated. You know, Emma, I'm starting to wonder if you've been planning this for longer than anyone realizes. Planning what? This whole victim act. The dramatic wedding speech, the media interviews, the sudden romance with that lawyer who just happened to show up with FBI documents. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his desperate charm replaced by something much more dangerous. It's quite a coincidence that Daniel Hayes appeared at exactly the right moment, with exactly the information you needed to destroy my reputation. I felt my heart rate accelerate, but forced myself to remain calm. Are you suggesting I orchestrated being abandoned at my own wedding? I'm suggesting that a smart woman like you might have seen the writing on the wall months ago and decided to position herself as the innocent victim before the truth came out, Marcus said, his eyes narrowing. After all, what better way to avoid being charged as an accomplice than to become the prosecution's star witness? An accomplice to what, Marcus? What crimes exactly am I supposedly accomplice to? You signed financial documents, Emma. You attended client meetings. You knew about the offshore accounts because you helped me set them up during our trip to the Cayman Islands last year. My blood ran cold. We had gone to the Cayman Islands for what I thought was a romantic vacation. Marcus had asked me to sign some papers related to a retirement fund he was setting up for us. I'd trusted him completely and signed without reading them carefully. You used our vacation to make me an unwitting accomplice to money laundering, I said, the pieces falling into place. I used our vacation to protect both of us, Marcus corrected. But if you're going to play the innocent victim, Emma, I think it's only fair that the FBI knows about your involvement in establishing those accounts. The threat was clear, and for the first time since Saturday, I felt genuinely afraid. Not of Marcus physically, but of the possibility that my trust in him had made me legally vulnerable in ways I didn't understand. You're threatening me, I said quietly. I'm reminding you that we're in this together, Marcus replied. We always have been. Emma, think about what you're throwing away. My lawyers are the best in the country. They can beat these charges, but not if my own fiancé is. Testifying against me. Ex-fiancé, I corrected automatically. Are we? Really? Marcus reached across the table and took my hand before I could pull away. Emma, I know I hurt you Saturday. I know I handled everything badly. But we can fix this. We can get married. Quietly. Present a united front and get through this together. You want to marry me now? After everything? I want to marry the woman I love before a corrupt federal investigation destroys both our lives, Marcus said, his grip on my hand tightening. Emma, if you testify against me, you're not just destroying my life. You're destroying our life together. Everything we built, everything we planned, everything we built was based on lies, I said, trying to pull my hand free. Everything we planned was funded by stolen money. It was funded by my success, Marcus insisted, his charming mask slipping further. Success that required taking calculated risks. Emma, you lived in my penthouse. You wore the jewelry I bought you. You ate at the restaurants I took you to. You benefited from everything you're now calling criminal. I benefited because I trusted you to be honest about where the money came from. And now that you know the truth, you can choose to stand by me or throw me to the wolves to save yourself, Marcus said, his voice growing harder. But don't pretend you're some innocent victim, Emma. You enjoyed the lifestyle my crimes provided. Through my earpiece, I could hear Agent Chen's voice. He's getting agitated. We're moving closer. Marcus seemed to sense something had changed in my demeanor. He released my hand and sat back, his eyes scanning the cafe with new suspicion. You know, Emma, for someone who claims to be devastated by my betrayal, you seem remarkably composed, he said slowly. Most women don't recover from being left at the altar quite this quickly. Maybe most women don't discover their fiancé is a criminal quite this publicly. Or maybe, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, most women aren't. Wearing FBI wires to secretly record conversations with the men they claim to love? My heart stopped. What are you talking about? You're sitting differently than you usually do. You're being very careful about how you phrase things. And that barista over there? Marcus glanced toward the counter. I've never seen him before, but he's been watching our table since you arrived. I forced myself to remain calm, but Marcus was already standing up. You know what the real irony is, Emma, he said, loud enough that his voice would carry clearly on any recording device. I really was trying to protect you Saturday. My lawyers told me that marrying you while under investigation could make you an accessory to federal crimes. I left you at that altar because I loved you too much to drag you down with me. He leaned down, placing his hands on the table and bringing his face close to mine. But apparently, you'd rather drag me down with you instead. With that, Marcus walked toward the exit, leaving me sitting alone at our old table with my heart pounding and the voices of FBI agents crackling through my earpiece. Target is leaving the building. Agent Chen's voice was sharp. Emma, stay seated. Do not follow him. But I was already standing, not to follow Marcus, but because sitting still was impossible. Through the cafe window, I watched him disappear. Around the corner, probably heading straight to his lawyers to report that the FBI was using his ex-fiancée to gather evidence against him. Did we get what we needed? I asked quietly, knowing the surveillance team could hear me. More than we needed, Agent Chen's voice was satisfied. His admission about the offshore accounts, his threats about implicating you, his acknowledgement that he knew about the investigation before the wedding. All of it contradicts his lawyer's claims of innocence. The FBI agents posing as customers began filing out discreetly, but I remained seated, processing what had just happened. Marcus had threatened to implicate me in his crimes if I testified against him. He'd admitted to using our vacation to set up money laundering accounts, and he'd made it clear that his abandonment of me at the altar was calculated strategy, not panicked response. But he'd also figured out that I was recording him, which meant his lawyers now knew the FBI was using me to gather evidence. The game had become much more dangerous. Daniel appeared at my table within minutes, sliding into the seat Marcus had vacated. "Are you okay?" he asked, studying my face with concern. "He threatened me," I said quietly. "Not physically, but legally." "Daniel? He's claiming I helped him set up the offshore accounts when we went to the Cayman Islands last year." Daniel's expression grew grim. "What exactly did you sign down there?" "Papers I thought were for a retirement fund. I trusted him completely, so I didn't read them carefully." I felt sick thinking about my naive willingness to sign whatever Marcus put in front of me. Could I really be charged as an accomplice? "Not if you signed without knowledge of criminal intent," Daniel assured me. "But Emma, this complicates things. His lawyers are going to argue that you're cooperating with the FBI to avoid prosecution yourself." "Even though that's not true?" "Even though that's not true." I sank back in my chair, suddenly exhausted. So now I'm not just the abandoned bride, seeking revenge. I'm also the criminal accomplice trying to save herself by framing an innocent man. "Hey," Daniel said gently, reaching across the table to take my hand. "Marcus just made several admissions that contradict everything his lawyers have been claiming. The recording proves he's been lying about his motives and his knowledge of the investigation. But it also proves he knows I'm working with the FBI now, which means he's going to get desperate," Daniel said, his expression serious. "Emma, we need to get you somewhere safe. Marcus knows his back is against the wall now, and desperate people make dangerous choices." As if summoned by his words, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You always were too smart for your own. Good. Enjoy your Pyrrhic victory. M." I showed the message to Daniel, who immediately called Agent Chen. "We need protective detail for Emma," he said without preamble. "Marcus knows about the recording, and he's making veiled threats." As Daniel arranged. For my protection, I stared out the cafe window at the street where Marcus had disappeared. 4 days ago, I'd been planning to promise him my life, my love, and my future. Now I was afraid of what he might do to destroy all three. But underneath the fear was something else, a growing sense of my own power. Marcus had tried to threaten me, manipulate me, and control me one last time. Instead, he'd given the FBI everything. They needed to prove his guilt. The abandoned bride had become the prosecutor's secret weapon. And Marcus Wellington III was about to learn that some victories are worth any price. The FBI safe house was a nondescript townhouse in Arlington, chosen specifically for its anonymity and security features. For the past 3 days, I'd been living under federal protection while Marcus's legal team launched increasingly desperate attacks on my credibility. Their latest motion claimed I was an unreliable witness suffering from emotional instability following my public humiliation. "They're grasping at straws," Patricia explained during our morning briefing, her laptop open to a news article titled, "Abandoned Bride or Criminal Mastermind." "But the judge has agreed to review the Cayman Islands documents you signed to determine if you had any criminal knowledge." I sat at the kitchen table wearing FBI-issued casual clothes, feeling like I was living someone else's life. Through the window, I could see Agent Martinez maintaining his post in the unmarked car outside. The protection detail had become necessary after Marcus's threatening messages escalated to late-night phone calls and surveillance photos of my apartment building appearing on social media, with captions suggesting I was hiding from the truth. "What does that mean for the case?" Daniel asked, entering with coffee for everyone. He'd been staying at the safe house too, ostensibly to help with legal strategy, but really because neither of us could bear to be apart during this storm. "It means the prosecution needs to prove Emma's innocence before they can use her testimony to prove Marcus's guilt," Patricia replied. "We're essentially putting Emma on trial first." My phone buzzed with a call from Agent Chen. "Turn on Channel 7 News," she said without preamble. "Marcus is giving a live interview." Daniel grabbed the remote, and we watched in stunned silence as Marcus appeared on screen, immaculately groomed and sitting in what looked like his family's estate library. The man who'd looked haggard and desperate 3 days ago had been replaced by the polished, confident businessman I'd fallen in love with. The truth is, Marcus was saying to the sympathetic interviewer, Emma and I had been growing apart for months. She'd become obsessed with my business dealings, constantly pressuring me to take riskier investments to fund her increasingly expensive lifestyle demands. I felt my mouth drop open. He's blaming me for his crimes? She knew about every financial decision because she insisted on being involved. Marcus continued smoothly. Emma has an MBA from Wharton and worked in marketing. She wasn't some naive girlfriend who signed papers without understanding them. She was a full partner in every business strategy. The interviewer leaned forward with practiced concern. So you're saying she was involved in the alleged financial irregularities? I'm saying that Emma Collins is an intelligent, ambitious woman who saw an opportunity to escape responsibility for her own actions by positioning herself as a victim, Marcus replied. The FBI has convinced her that cooperation will lead to immunity, so she's willing to destroy an innocent man to save herself. But she was abandoned at your wedding, the interviewer pressed. How do you explain that? Marcus's expression grew pained, and I had to admire his acting ability. I received a call that morning warning me the FBI was planning to arrest both of us during the ceremony. I made the agonizing decision to spare Emma that humiliation by leaving myself. I thought if I wasn't there, they'd have no reason to disrupt her special day. You left to protect her? I left because I loved her too much to let her be arrested in her wedding dress in front of 300 guests, Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. I never imagined she'd use my sacrifice to frame me for crimes we both committed. Turn it off, I said quietly. I can't watch anymore. Daniel muted the television, but the damage was done. Marcus had just presented a completely different narrative to millions of viewers. One where I was the mastermind and he was the loving fiancé who'd sacrificed himself to protect me. It's brilliant, Patricia said grimly. Despicable, but brilliant. He's transformed the story from criminal abandons bride to innocent man betrayed by ambitious partner. My phone was already ringing with calls from reporters wanting my response. Social media was exploding with debates about whether I was a victim or a villain. The hashtag Dark Emma Criminal was trending alongside Dark Truth-Telling Bride. We need to respond, I said, standing up and pacing the small kitchen. We can't let him control the narrative again. Emma, no, Daniel said immediately. Anything you say publicly right now can be used against you in court. Let the evidence speak for itself. The evidence won't matter if everyone believes I'm the real criminal, I shot back. Marcus is trying to destroy my credibility before I can testify. I need to defend myself. Actually, Patricia said slowly, checking her phone, we might not need to worry about public opinion much longer. Why? Because Agent Chen just texted me. They found something. An hour later, we were back at the federal building in a conference room that had become our second home. Agent Chen and Prosecutor Ross were waiting with expressions that ranged from excitement to grim satisfaction. Marcus made a mistake, Agent Chen announced without preamble. A big one. She activated the large monitor on the wall, displaying what appeared to be financial records and email chains. After his television interview this morning, Marcus contacted his offshore bank in the Cayman Islands, she continued. He was apparently concerned that his public statements about Emma's involvement might have exposed those accounts to scrutiny. What did he do? I asked. He tried to transfer all the remaining funds, approximately $12 million, to a new account in his name only, Ross said with satisfaction. An account that explicitly excluded any connection to Emma Collins. I stared at the screen. But if I was really his partner in crime, why would he cut me out of the money? Exactly, Agent Chen smiled. His actions today prove that Emma was never a knowing participant in the money laundering scheme. If she had been, he would have left her access to the accounts to maintain the fiction of their partnership. Instead, Ross added, He panicked and tried to grab all the money for himself, proving that Emma was never a real conspirator. Daniel leaned back in his chair with relief. So his own greed just destroyed his defense strategy. It gets better, Agent Chen said, advancing to the next screen. The bank required additional documentation for the transfer, including verification of Marcus's claims about Emma's lack of legal standing. Marcus provided a sworn affidavit stating that Emma Collins had no knowledge of the true purpose of the accounts and had signed documents under false pretenses. I felt my knees go weak. He signed a legal document admitting I was innocent? He signed a legal document admitting he defrauded you into becoming an unwitting accomplice, Patricia clarified, which not only clears you of criminal liability, but also proves he's been lying to his own lawyers about your level of involvement. The implications were staggering. Marcus's attempt to protect his stolen money had led him to provide written proof that I was a victim, not a conspirator. His greed had become our smoking gun. There's more, Ross said, clearly enjoying himself. Marcus's lawyers had no idea he was moving money around today. When they find out, and they will find out because we're sharing this evidence with them, they're going to realize their client has been lying to them about fundamental facts of the case. What does that mean? I asked. It means they'll probably withdraw from representing him, Patricia explained. No lawyer wants to be caught lying to a federal court based on their client's deception. Agent Chen's phone buzzed, and she checked it with a growing smile. And right on schedule, she announced. Marcus's lead counsel just filed a motion to withdraw from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with client regarding case strategy. The room fell silent as we absorbed what had just happened. In the span of 6 hours, Marcus had gone from mounting a credible defense to losing his legal team and providing written evidence of his own guilt. So what happens now? I asked. Now Marcus faces the choice between representing himself against federal fraud charges or finding new lawyers willing to take on a case where their client has already admitted to key elements of the prosecution's argument, Ross said. Either way, his chances of avoiding conviction just dropped to essentially zero. Daniel took my hand under the table. It's over, Emma. You won. But even as relief flooded through me, I couldn't help but think about the man I'd once loved enough to marry. The Marcus who'd charmed me at charity galas, who'd made me laugh during late-night dinners, who'd proposed on a beach in Santorini while promising me forever. That man had probably never existed, but the memories felt real. Emma, Agent Chen, said gently, I know this is complicated emotionally, but I want you to understand what you've accomplished. Marcus's scheme would have continued indefinitely if you hadn't spoken up. The FBI estimates he would have stolen another $50 million before the system collapsed naturally. How many people would have been hurt? I asked. Hundreds of investors. Dozens of pension funds. Families who trusted their retirement savings to what they thought was a legitimate investment firm. Ross's expression was serious. Your courage prevented that. My phone buzzed with yet another call from a reporter, but this time I didn't feel the urge to answer. The story would tell itself now. Marcus's own actions had provided the ending. Want to go home, I said suddenly. Not to the safe house, to my real home. Emma, we still don't know how Marcus will react to losing his legal team, Agent Chen warned. He could become more dangerous when he realizes he's out of options. Then let him, I said, standing up with new determination. I'm not hiding anymore. Marcus Wellington III has controlled enough of my life. I'm taking the rest of it back. Daniel stood too, his expression concerned but supportive. If Emma wants to go home, I'll make sure she's safe. Patricia gathered her files with a satisfied expression. In that case, let's prepare for Marcus's surrender, because after today's developments, that's the only rational option he has left. We left the federal building. I felt the weight of the past week finally lifting from my shoulders. The abandoned bride who'd stood in that chapel 7 days ago had been broken and betrayed. The woman walking into the evening sun was neither broken nor betrayed. She was victorious. Marcus had taught me that some people will betray anyone to save themselves. But in trying to save himself one last time, he'd given me everything I needed to ensure justice was served. The irony was perfect. The man who'd left me at the altar to escape consequences had created the very consequences he'd tried to avoid. And the woman he'd underestimated had become the architect of his downfall. As Daniel and I walked toward his car, past reporters, who shouted questions we didn't need to answer anymore, I realized something important. This hadn't just been about revenge or justice or even love. It had been about finding my own voice and refusing to let anyone silence it again. And I had found that voice. Now it was time to use it to build something better than anything Marcus Wellington III had ever offered me. 3 months later, I stood in my office at Morrison Associates, looking out at the city skyline that had once included the Wellington Industries building. The demolition crews had finished last week, making way for a new development that would house a foundation for fraud victims, funded, ironically, by the assets recovered from Marcus's criminal enterprise. The Hartley Industries campaign is ready for your final approval, my assistant announced, setting a portfolio on my desk. As the firm's new senior director of crisis communications, I'd become something of a specialist in helping companies rebuild their reputations after scandals. The irony wasn't lost on me. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Verdict in 30 minutes. Are you ready for this?" I wasn't sure anyone could be ready for the moment when their ex-fiancé's fate was decided by 12 strangers, but I'd been preparing for this day since Marcus's trial began 6 weeks ago. The proceedings had been swift and decisive. With his court-appointed attorney, no firm would touch his case after the offshore account debacle, mounting only a token defense. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the federal courthouse gallery beside Daniel, watching Marcus at the defendant's table. He'd aged years in the past few months, his once perfect appearance replaced by the hollow look of a man who'd lost everything. His family had disowned him after the full scope of his crimes became public. His former friends avoided him like a plague. Even his mother had stopped visiting after the prosecution revealed he'd stolen money from her charity foundation. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Martinez asked. "We have, Your Honor." The jury foreman stood, holding the papers that would determine Marcus's future. I found myself holding my breath, even though the outcome had been inevitable since Marcus destroyed his own defense. On the count of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. The litany continued for 12 counts, each guilty, driving home the magnitude of Marcus's crimes. When it was over, he slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his charm and manipulation had reached their limits. As the courtroom erupted in quiet conversations and reporters hurried out to file their stories, Marcus turned and looked directly at me. For a moment, the mask of defeated resignation slipped, and I saw pure hatred in his eyes. He mouthed something I couldn't quite make out, but the intent was clear. "He's going away for a very long time," Daniel said quietly, taking my hand. "The sentencing guidelines call for 25 to 30 years. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and something I hadn't expected, pity. The man who'd once controlled my dreams of the future would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison cell, and despite everything he'd done, I couldn't take joy in anyone's complete destruction. "Emma Collins?" A reporter approached as we left the courthouse. "How do you feel about today's verdict?" "I feel like justice has been served," I said simply. "But more importantly, I feel like this chapter of my life is finally closed." "Any regrets about your decision to speak out?" I looked at Daniel, then back at the reporter. "My only regret is that I didn't speak out sooner. Too many people were hurt by Marcus's crimes because I trusted him for too long." As we walked away from the courthouse, I realized the weight I'd been carrying for months was finally lifting. The abandoned bride story was over. The federal witness chapter was complete. What remained was figuring out who Emma Collins would become next. "Dinner to celebrate?" Daniel asked as we reached his car. "Actually," I said, "I have a better idea." An hour later, we were standing outside St. Augustine's chapel, where this entire journey had begun. The afternoon sun was casting the same golden light through the stained glass windows, but everything else had changed. "Why here?" Daniel asked gently. "Because this is where I learned that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you becomes the doorway to something better," I said, taking his hand. 4 months ago, I was standing here planning to promise my life to a man who was lying to me about everything. Today, I'm here with someone who's never told me anything but the truth. Daniel stopped walking and turned to face me. "Emma, I need to tell you something." My heart skipped, wondering if this was the moment when another man would reveal he wasn't who I thought he was. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's crazy. We met during the worst crisis of your life. We've been through a federal investigation together. Nothing about this has been normal. But I love your courage, your integrity, your refusal to be anyone's victim. I love the way you fight for what's right, even when it costs you everything." Relief and joy flooded through me in equal measure. "Daniel, I'm not proposing," he said, quickly, making me laugh. "I think we've both had enough drama around marriage proposals for 1 year. I just wanted you to know that whatever comes next, I want to face it with you. Even if the media never lets me forget I'm the woman who destroyed her own wedding. Especially because you're the woman who destroyed her own wedding," Daniel said, pulling me closer. "That took more courage than most people have in their entire lives." I looked up at the chapel doors, remembering the terrified bride who'd walked through them 4 months ago. That woman had been so afraid of disappointing others that she'd nearly destroyed herself. The woman standing here now knew that disappointment was survivable, but betraying yourself wasn't. "I love you too," I said, the words feeling as natural as breathing. "And you're right, this hasn't been normal, but maybe normal is overrated." Daniel kissed me then, right there on the chapel steps where I'd once planned to marry a criminal. It felt like the perfect ending to one story and the perfect beginning to another. 6 months later, I was back in the news, but for very different reasons. The Emma Collins Foundation for Corporate Fraud Victims had officially launched, funded by speaking fees, book royalties, and my settlement from Marcus's estate. The foundation provided legal support and financial assistance to people who'd been victimized by white-collar crime. The irony, I told the journalist interviewing me for the foundation's launch, is that Marcus's betrayal gave me a platform to help other people who've faced similar betrayals. He thought abandoning me would protect him, but it actually gave me the power to ensure other victims get justice. The foundation's first client was a woman whose husband had embezzled their children's college funds for a Ponzi scheme. The second was an elderly couple who'd lost their retirement savings to a fraudulent investment advisor. Each case reminded me that my public humiliation had been a small price to pay for the ability to prevent others from suffering in silence. "Any word on Marcus?" the journalist asked. "He's serving his sentence at a federal correctional facility," I said. "I hope he's using the time to reflect on the harm he caused. Redemption is possible for anyone willing to face the truth about their actions." I meant it, though I doubted Marcus would ever take that path. His final letter to me, smuggled out through his sister, had been full of blame and self-pity rather than remorse. He still insisted he'd been unfairly persecuted for aggressive business practices, and that I'd destroyed an innocent man for revenge. Some people, I'd learned, prefer their delusions to the truth. After the interview, I drove to Daniel's law firm for lunch. His practice had expanded significantly since the Wellington case, with other fraud victims seeking his representation. We'd become partners in both business and life, though we'd agreed to keep things unofficial until the media attention died down. "How did the interview go?" he asked as we walked to our favorite cafe. Not Cafe Luna, which held too many complicated memories. Good. The foundation's already received 50 applications for assistance. I squeezed his hand. I keep thinking about the butterfly effect. If Marcus hadn't abandoned me at the altar, none of this would exist. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if he'd shown up to the wedding? I considered the question seriously. I think I would have eventually figured out who he really was. But by then, I might have been legally married to him when the FBI made their arrests. I could have lost everything and had no platform to rebuild from. So, his cowardice saved you. In more ways than one. His cowardice saved me, introduced me to you, and gave me a purpose I never knew I was looking for. I agreed. Sometimes the worst day of your life really is the first day of your new life. A year after the verdict, Daniel and I were featured in a magazine article about couples who'd found love in unusual circumstances. The photographer wanted to shoot us at various locations around the city, including, inevitably, St. Augustine's Chapel. Full circle, Daniel observed as we posed on the steps where we'd first kissed. Not quite, I said, looking up at the building that had witnessed both my greatest humiliation and my first step toward real happiness. Circles end where they begin. This feels more like a spiral. We're in the same place, but at a completely different level. The photographer asked us to recreate the moment from our first meeting, Daniel in a suit with documents, me in white. Instead of my elaborate wedding gown, I wore a simple white dress I'd chosen myself, paid for with money I'd earned through my own success. The real difference, I told Daniel as we waited for the photographer to adjust his lights, is that the first time I was in white on these steps, I was trying to become someone else's idea of the perfect wife. Today, I'm just being myself. And yourself is perfect, Daniel said, kissing my forehead. Herself is real, I corrected. Perfect is overrated. Real is everything. The final photo in the magazine showed us walking away from the chapel together, not toward it. The caption read, "Sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst breakups." 2 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. Not from Marcus. He'd finally stopped writing after I'd had my lawyer send a cease and desist order. But from his mother. "Dear Emma," it began, "I owe you an apology. When Marcus was arrested, I blamed you for destroying my son's life. I've spent the past 2 years in therapy learning to face the truth about the man I raised and the crimes he committed. You didn't destroy Marcus's life. You revealed who he really was and prevented him from destroying more lives," the letter continued. "I've been following your foundation's work and the lives you've saved through your courage to speak out. My son's victims include people who trusted him with their children's futures, their retirement dreams, their life savings. What you did wasn't revenge. It was justice. Thank you for having the strength to tell the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet." I showed the letter to Daniel that evening as we sat in our apartment. Our apartment, the one we'd chosen together based on what we both wanted, rather than what anyone else expected. "How do you feel about that?" he asked. "Grateful," I said. Not for the apology, though that was generous of her. Grateful that I learned to trust my own judgment about what's right and wrong, instead of letting other people define it for me. Daniel set down his coffee and looked at me with the expression I'd come to recognize as his serious conversation face. "Emma, I want to ask you something, and I need you to know there's no wrong answer." My heart started beating faster. "Okay. Would you like to get married?" I stared at him. "Are you proposing?" "I'm asking if you want to be proposed to," he said carefully. "After everything you've been through, I don't want to assume marriage is something you want again. And if I say yes, then I'll plan the most perfect proposal for the woman who deserves everything good this world has to offer." I thought about the woman who'd planned her perfect wedding 2 years ago, choosing flowers and venues and dresses to impress guests she barely knew. That woman had wanted a wedding, The woman I'd become wanted a marriage, a real partnership with someone who valued truth over appearances. Yes, I said simply. But Daniel? Yeah? No churches, no big reception, no 300 guests. I smiled, thinking of how much I'd changed. Just us, making promises we actually intend to keep. Just us, he agreed, pulling me into his arms. And maybe a really good photographer to document the moment when the truth-telling bride became the truth-living wife. As he kissed me, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. Marcus's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been the catalyst for becoming the person I was meant to be. His abandonment had taught me that I didn't need anyone else's approval to live authentically. His lies had shown me the value of truth. His manipulation had made me appreciate genuine partnership. In trying to destroy me, Marcus Wellington III had actually freed me to become someone stronger, braver, and infinitely happier than the woman who'd been abandoned at the altar 2 years ago. Some stories begin with, "Once upon a time." Others begin with, "And then everything fell apart." Mine began with, "He left me standing at the altar," but it ended with, "And that's when my real life began." The truth-telling bride had found her truth living happily ever after, and it was better than any fairy tale because it was real, it was earned, and it was entirely my own. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.